Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and a tabletop role-playing aficionado. I have finally read through the new 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide and came away with some stuff I like and some stuff that I'm disappointed in, which is what this video is all about. If you enjoy my channel and want to support these kinds of D&D videos, please check out patreon.com/Rogue Watson, and we'll be using the Roll20 version as a kind of visual guide, but I've also got the book obviously open in front of me because that's what I've been looking at most closely. And I think going into it, we're going to come up with about 8 things that I can highlight as being stuff that I really like out of this new book, and about 5 things that I'm mostly kind of disappointed in. Obviously, we'll be comparing it a lot to the 2014 version because this is all just, a half step from the original release of 5th edition. I also know a lot of folks are just getting the new player's handbooks. They can obviously deal with all the new rules part of it and not necessarily the new Dungeon Master's Guide because you're doing your own thing as a DM and you probably don't need all these new rules. I don't know if this video is going to convince you one way or the other. Hopefully I can just provide you with some insight about what's in the book and maybe what my overall recommendations are. I would say that, if you're already good rolling with, 5th edition stuff, I would say you probably are going to want that monster manual when it comes out because if you've been watching my, class videos and you know that everybody got a nice buff and everybody's very strong and powerful, and you'll probably need monsters to combat that. And oddly, it feels weird to say, but the DMG is probably going to end up being the least useful of the 3 books that are released for the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide, but I think there is some really good stuff in here. So pay attention to the video, and we're going to go over everything that I like and don't like. So the first thing that I really like is something I can't really show very well in the Roll20 visual part of it here, but it's just the overall, the layout, the organization, how the chapters are organized, the way the art is inlaid, the sidebars, just everything really puts together to make an amazing product. The art is just incredible, although I think I was actually more impressed with the art from the player's handbook than the Dungeon Master's Guide necessarily. But it still does a really cool job of putting everything together and allowing me to, separate in terms of what is world building information versus what is mechanics information. The whole DM's toolkit, which is actually I'm going to put as a separate pro, by the way. Or maybe I can combine them. Yeah, it's probably I need to combine those two. So see, there we go. We're already changing it. So the overall layout and organization, but particularly the DM's toolkit, which is chapter 3 here, which lays out everything alphabetically that you need to look up. That's really just important information for DMs that you're probably going to want to, crack open the book and look at. For example, chase details, how to deal with death and dying states, firearms, hazards, groups of enemies are called mobs, NPCs. There's a whole cool little bit about non-player characters and having tables full of names and things to look at. In fact, we can look at that one. I've already got the tab open here. So just some nice, information, and a lot of it is just organized in a very, very easy way to get all that information ready to go. And I especially prefer the fact that all the chapters, like the beginning chapter is what does it mean to be a DM? How do you make the game fun for everybody? How do you organize all your stuff? What kind of play is important? All the session 0, which is way, way better than how the 2014 version started, where it was here's how to create a multiverse. No, that's not what you want to do, especially to a new DM. That is overwhelming. Instead, we bump all that cosmology stuff down to chapter 6, I believe. So we start off with just the basic rules of the game, and then the very important stuff about how to run that game and make sure the DM knows all the different tools, as well as the social acumen of reading the room and knowing your players, that kind of stuff that you learn from experience, but also you can teach at least somewhat in a book to start learning about that kind of thing. So all of that is very, very important. The other thing I really like, which we're actually going to bump over to the D&D Beyond website to look at, are these really adorable tracking sheets that are organized throughout the entire book. I don't know how many of these there are. Well, I guess if we scroll down, you can start seeing them, but these are interlaced in all of the different chapters and sections, but they're designed to be fully printable. So you can literally print them out of the book, or what we're all going to probably do is just go to D&D Beyond. This is free, by the way. You don't have to have the freaking Dungeon Master's Guide to access this, as far as I know. These are completely free to download all these sheets, but I'm going to include it as a pro because it is in Dungeon Master's Guide. But they just give you some very nice, attractive, cool tracking sheets for different elements that you might want to, keep track of as a DM if we're not using, the myriad of digital software and things to use if you want to go through it old school and just have all these kind of cool sheets, but make them look really cool. I love whoever was on the design team, by the way, that decided, you know what, these tracking sheets are nice. We can make them attractive. But also, what if we put like adorable chibi baby like monsters all over these sheets? Like, how awesome would that be? Like, yes, it is awesome. High five to you for including like this baby Dark Mantle and like Hellhound. Like, these are absolutely incredible. I love it. The little Myconid kid, like amazing, great. These are all really nice. They're all, you know, keeping track of NPCs and any important magic items and loot, ongoing storyline like conflicts and everything. A new magic item tracker, which is included in the treasure section, so you can make sure you're divvying out the appropriate amount of items to your characters. And I know for anybody who watches my streams know that I give out way too many magic items. In fact, I was pleased to see that the book actually comes out and says, hey, by the way, all these characters and presumably all the monsters are all balanced, that nobody has any magic items whatsoever, which I hate, and I've always hated it that 5th edition does that. It makes the character so powerful they don't need magic items. I'm somebody who loves playing video games that are all about loot and love collecting magic items, and know my players are the same way. So I constantly battle against that basically, but at least the book was like, hey, by the way, your players are going to be able to punch up quite a bit if you're giving them a lot of powerful magic items. I do want to highlight as well the journey section, which is, I think it's in, let's see, creating adventures, drawing in the players, bring it in. I thought I had this written down on that chapter. I liked it, but I sure don't. It was under exploration, plan encounters, maybe it was exploration encounters. That might have been, but there's a neat section, which hopefully I can show you. It's not under campaign, I don't think, that involves like how to break down the exploration part, because exploration in D&D and 5th edition has always been, there we go, running exploration in chapter 2. Maybe that's what I'm looking for. Kind of an underbaked element of the game where it's like, oh, we're journeying from one destination to another. Yeah, I think this is the part I'm looking for in chapter 2. And, you know, it's great for dungeons. Obviously, we can all do social role playing and stuff in the cities, but how do you get to those in between moments where we're just traveling and making that interesting? I don't know if this necessarily solves. It doesn't have any like super clever ways of solving this, or like, oh, you try these kind of tricks or something. But I do like the way it's organized, and it mentions important things like visibility at distance, how to break down the travel concept into stages, and making sure you're breaking up that stage into having different events happening, not all of which have to be encounters with monsters, for example. It could just be some kind of environmental hazard or weather thing. Gives you an example of, foraging can be something, coming across obstacles, having to track creatures, all of which can be, a little bit more meaningful and interesting to the players having to travel from one side to another. So I did appreciate it, and it is, it's not just a short little blip in the DM's toolkit. It is a pretty long, lengthy section that I read through, and as somebody who needs a refresher on this kind of pillar of D&D, I thought this was a very nice section to have. Excuse me. Then we go to another pro of mine, which I will get to my cons in a moment. In fact, we'll probably get to it after this one. The Greyhawk section is awesome. It's it's not an entire chapter, but it's a good chunk of chapter 5. Chapter 5 talks about creating campaigns. Chapter 4 is about creating adventures, has a lot about encounters and things. And chapter 5 is all about stringing those together in an overall campaign. And then it has, as an example, here's a campaign world, which is Greyhawk. We get 30 pages of what amounts to like a Greyhawk gazetteer. In fact, I think they literally call it a Greyhawk gazetteer at one point. You do get this map, a huge fold-out map. You also get, you get 3 maps. I forget which ones are the 2. I think it's this one and the Greyhawk city are the 2 like physical big fold-out maps for the actual book. But there's also another map in the book that's the it's like the medium region. It's like the region around Greyhawk. So it's like you get 3 different like levels of zoom for this world. And I'm somebody who doesn't really know much about Greyhawk. I don't have much nostalgia or knowledge of the earlier editions of D&D, which is where Greyhawk was primarily used. And I will say as another con, nothing in this source book necessarily convinced me that Greyhawk is a great place to have an adventure, which seems like a horrible indictment, but that's only because it's very, very similar to the Forgotten Realms in terms of like the situation of the world and the level of magic and like the biomes, like everything is to me coming at it without knowing like a good chunk of the real lore and history. On the surface, it just feels like we might as well be playing in the Forgotten Realms, right? So if you're balking at that and going, oh, Eric, no, because of this, and I'm like, this is going to be very exciting for you then, because there's a lot in here that explains why the Greyhawk region is so cool. And from a just purely sourcebook part of it, it is written very well. I've reviewed a lot of content on the DM's Guild, a lot of source books and world books and everything, and this does a really great job of going over all that information. It's literally like formatted slightly, not formatted, but the background, like parchment paper color, is like different in this whole like 30-page section, because it is meant to be like this separate source book issue. But it goes over the whole city of Greyhawk, it goes over the surrounding areas, and then it talks about in a macro level all these individual regions, and then it also talks about like what are the villainous factions, like what makes it an interesting place to adventure in. It just so happens that like the problem is all the interesting stuff has already been converted to the Forgotten Realms, right? There's like, hey, here's the Temple of Elemental Evil, which, by the way, was shown in Prince of the Apocalypse. Here's the Tomb of Horrors, which we converted to Tomb of Annihilation. Like, here's White Plume Mountain, and I forget some of the other ones, but ones that are basically all included in Tales of the Yawning Portal. So that's the problem I'm having going into it, is like Greyhawk doesn't really feel that distinct, because you already took all the bits of Greyhawk that are the most interesting and put it into the Forgotten Realms. But if you are a purist or you're really interested in the Greyhawk thing, I think this does a great job. And I am putting it in a pro because from a pure like world building standpoint, I do think it's a very interesting, cool section. It's very informative, very long, and I enjoyed it a lot. So thumbs up for that. For some of my cons we can go over, there's no more Madness table. In fact, they're not even calling it Madness anymore, which I didn't realize that was like, I don't know if that's like a politically correct thing or something. We're not supposed to use Madness anymore. I did not get the memo on that one. Shoot, where are my DM's toolkit? It's out. You know what? I can't find it because I'm looking for Madness, but I thought it was, I thought it was under mental stress or something. Is it not? Shoot. But essentially, there, instead of Madness, we have, it's just mental, what is it called? It's not called mental stress. What is it called? I thought it was in the DM's toolkit. Curses and magical contagions, maybe? Did I not have this written down? What did I have this written down? Oh, page 70. Page 70. Yeah, it is. Oh, fear. Fear and mental stress. Okay, I'm looking at it right there. Everybody on the video is like, right fucking there. Fear and mental stress. So we no longer, as far as I'm aware, I didn't find anything. There's no such thing as Madness anymore. Instead, we have fear, which you can trigger to make people have the frightened condition, or basically the fear effect of that spell by having a wisdom saving throw at different DCs. Or we have mental stress effects, which is short term. You have the frightened, incapacitated, or stunned conditions for several minutes, which are basically like the worst parts of the short term madness table. Or long term effects, which is we have disadvantage on some or all ability checks, or from an unwillingness or inability to exert a particular set of abilities. So we lose those cool tables, right? And I use those tables quite a bit in my last 10 years of being a DM, like those short-term madness, long-term madness, and I think indefinite madness tables. So it felt like a real bummer to get rid of the tables. At least I'm okay with we can change the terminology, whatever, but the lack of like all the tables and stuff I thought was pretty disappointing. So this is the only little bit we get on that whole madness section. I was expecting like one of the parts of the DM toolkit, and it took me a minute to even discover it's fear and mental stress is what it's called now. So that's kind of a thumbs down for me. Treasure. Gosh, treasure is actually going to come up on both pros and cons here. So interesting for treasure. We knew treasure was going to be a big part of this, Dungeon Master's Guide. And raise your hand if the treasure section of the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide was your most used section and the reason you cracked that book out more often than not. My hand is raised. Which was an amazing section. It was a hugely awesome, useful part of that book. And the thing that I kept coming back to was just the awesome amount of useful magic items and things that were found in that book. So it's a pro and a con here. The pro is that the treasure section of the new 2024 book basically includes and nicely combines everything that has been released so far, which is basically the like common items and crafting stuff from Xanathar's and any new stuff added in Tasha's. It also includes any like artifact stuff alphabetically instead of at the end. Like everything is just included in there and appears to just be, again, organized really nicely and easier to kind of parse and handle. The crafting rules are all laid out right there. People can craft their potions, their magic items, and everything. There's some tables for coming up with your own magic items. Like everything is just in one single chapter, which I appreciate and is a pretty good pro. I'm going through all these tables right now. There we go. And there's the actual magic items from A to Z. That's a big pro. My con, I guess, is that there are not really very many new treasures, which, granted, treasure was probably the biggest thing that didn't need. This is excessive now. It's just doing all the different. This isn't actually a good list. It's like, oh, look, there's, yeah, everything can be in vulnerability. Like, yeah, that's 40 items, whatever. There's not a whole lot of brand new items here. I have not actually like itemized or gone through or compared every single book that's been released, because the problem is they just included everything, like things that were added in Strixhaven or whatever, like all that shit I think is in this book. So I don't know what exactly is brand new. It didn't seem like very much though. I'm flipping through the treasure section. I'm recognizing most of the items there. Now, as somebody who doesn't own those books, that could be very useful and incredibly helpful and still be probably the main reason you're going to use this book. But for those of us that have all the books released, which again, as a lot of you saying, well, Eric, why do I need this book? Because I already have all those books. I hear you, and I'm saying, yes, I agree. There's not a whole lot of new, it's great to have all that stuff organized in one book, but wait for it to be on sale or something, I guess, because there's not going to be much more of use to you here. And in fact, it takes a slight step backwards, because I could never find a table so the tables I used the most in the 2014 version were the treasure hoard tables, right? It's like, oh, we just fought this big enemy, this boss enemy, or got to the end of this dungeon, and where's the treasures from that? I need to come up with something. And I would several times I would be like, all right, let's roll on this table and just see what kind of treasures, and it had it organized by like tier. It had like magic item table A and B and C and all that. None of that is here, and instead, from what I can infer from what it mentions as the loot, a lot of that is apparently going to be in the new monster manual. They're going to have monsters that specifically have certain kinds of loot, or perhaps reference certain kind of loot tables, because now the loot does come in different kind of see these tables right here: arcana, armaments, implements, and relics. And then they're all organized by rarity there. So it may be that certain enemies, maybe it might be like, oh yeah, you have I don't know, is it like a video game drop, like a Monster Hunter, where it's like this creature drops uncommon arcana items like this often or something? I don't know. We haven't looked at the monster manual left. Hopefully people can reference this clip of this video whenever the monster manual comes out and calls me either an idiot or a genius for predicting how it works in the new book. But none of that is unfortunately in the Dungeon Master's Guide that I can tell, which are those tables that I actually used quite a bit. There's, in another section, there is a spot that says individual treasure table, but I don't know, it's very bare bones, very tiny, and is not the big, long, detailed list that I was looking for. So treasure, in a way, is both a pro and a con for me. In fact, I think I actually included those as two different. No, sorry, that's one con. It's one con and one pro. Another con, to speaking of random tables, is it doesn't have there is a section for dungeons, and I think it's in the DM's toolkit actually. Yep. So there's a section of dungeons. I actually really liked the dungeon section of the 2014 book quite a bit, where it had all those tables where you could really like construct just a completely random dungeon if you wanted to, room by room. We don't really have any of that here, and there's no like appendix about dungeon crawling or anything. The only section about dungeons is what you're looking at right here, which is like, here's one table of like quirks, which is basically like, what is this kind of dungeon basically, and then you get just some ideas about certain kinds of rooms and stuff. It felt very, very much several steps backward and bare bones compared to even what the 2014 version did with dungeons. And I'm somebody who loves dungeons. I love like creating dungeons and coming up with dungeon ideas and having that be a big focus point of a lot of my adventures. And I think that's where D&D is run the best. It's in the fucking name. But I was shocked to see that doesn't seem to be a big focus in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So sorry for having my expectations set there, but that's definitely a con for me. Also, related to that, the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide did have tables for like biomes that you would find certain monsters in, or it was like, here's an Arctic table by level, and here are like the kind of creatures you would find in the Arctic for like level 1 through 5, and then from 6 to like all of those. I couldn't find any of that kind of information in the new Dungeon Master's Guide as well, which I thought was also moderately useful. So a lot of the tables, I guess, the randomized tables and organization there, I did not see in this new 2024 edition. We can talk about another positive, which is the Cosmology section, which is an entire chapter. So a lot of this information was included in the 2014 edition, but I don't think it was very well organized. I mentioned it's actually like at the start of the book, which is a horrible place to put it. And I think the new one is in chapter 6, and it goes over basically anything you could want about sort of astral planes and creating multiverses. Any information about planescape stuff and spelljammer stuff, as well as the different layers of hell and everything. It organizes it very, very well. It's easy to come up with see all this information, how the different planes interact with each other and all of that. So I really enjoyed this chapter and where it was organized, and also the like sole appendix in this Dungeon Master's Guide. Literally, there's only two. Sorry, I guess maps is one of them, which we'll get to maps in a second. Is the lore glossary, which kind of builds off that and is like a who's who of major characters throughout the entire D&D multiverse. So, whether it's like Strahd or a Serac or, Igwib / Tasha's, the Heroes of the Lance from, Dragonlance, like anything that maybe that you may have heard of, or is a mention or something that's an important either event or creature or faction that's in the D&D cosmology, mostly Forgotten Realms, but certainly not only there, is included in this lore glossary. And it's just a little paragraph for like all these different people. So I thought that was very useful and helpful indeed. So the Dungeon Master's Guide mentions adventures as like, hey, there's sample adventures in here. That's sort of true. Again, I review a lot of Dungeon Master's Guide content. If somebody said, hey, here's a book of adventures, and they gave me these adventures, I would not be very impressed. Which is, it's not like they're poorly written or anything, but there's just not a lot here. Like, this is an example of an adventure, like quote unquote. Like, this takes up about half a page, by the way, in the book. Some of them maybe a full page, but always about half a page of those, column format that they do. So it's like, they're like just story hook ideas more than anything, really. It's like, hey, go, cleanse this river of foul mushrooms or something. Or the most interesting one out of the group or go like help there's a Chul that like dug up, they dug too deep, of course, into the Underdark, and not Chul, it's a hook horror. That's like roaming around, and the players aren't even supposed to fight it. They're supposed to like avoid it because they're like level 2, which is actually kind of a cool idea. They're like a huge monster. They're not supposed to be able to fight like a xenomorph or something. And they just have to like try to open it a new path, and it goes down there or something. Winged God is just deal with the dragon. Horns of the Beast, though, is probably the most interesting one to me because it actually introduces an NPC. It's like a mini, what's the one that Tomb of Annihilation is kind of based on? It's like the Savage. Turning around to look at Isle of Dread. I've got a poster in my room, in my office, the Isle of Dread, where you're kind of going over to this, remote location. You have to survive this hostile area filled with dinosaurs, this kind of jungle. You end up going to these like ruins with like minotaurs and stuff, and you get a hold of this powerful artifact, and the NPC who's been leading you towards this thing because he wants it, of course, turns out to be a villain who wants it for himself, and he's putting it on to transform into some powerful, demon character. That's actually all really cool, but this one is the opposite problem, where I think it bites off a lot more than it can chew, where it has this huge, presumably pretty big adventure, and then condenses it into a very, very small thing that's just like an encounter table and stuff. So it's multiple problems for these that should have been like, hey, I guess my problem is they shouldn't have called these adventures. They should have been like, hey, here's some sample story ideas or hooks or concepts. We have concepts of an adventure to introduce to the players. And there's different kinds, which I appreciate. This one's more exploration based. There's one that's the Boreal Ball, which is like very social based at a Fey dance party or something. There's ones that are just, fairly straightforward dungeon crawls. But overall, I think it was kind of I hate to give it a thumbs down because the first 2014 Dungeon Master Guide didn't have anything like this, didn't have any adventure samples. But I expect more. I expect more. If you're going to give me adventure examples in the official Dungeons and Goddamn Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide, then I am going to expect more better from your adventures, and I don't think these were good enough there. Pro, I think we've got one more pro and one more con. I've been really playing fast and loose with this. So let's go over the, we're going to end on a positive. So let's end with the last con, which is there are maps included here. I don't know if I can actually see them on Roll20. You know what? I don't think I can, because I think they put them in probably a different section. Because yeah, the only appendix on here is the lore glossary. So there are maps. There are more maps than the 2014 version. But if you recall, the 2014 version had that amazing, like, Mike Schley full color detailed art. The maps that are included in the 2024 version, as I sneeze mightily, are not. They are kind of that Dyson Logos style. In fact, I think Dyson Logos did some, if not all, of these maps, which, I don't want to keep shitting on Dyson Logos. I think he's got a very distinct style that can be very nice for a lot of folks, but for somebody like me who plays primarily on a virtual tabletop, they just do not cut the mustard when it comes to wanting to play on a virtual tabletop. And a lot of these maps are referenced to in those adventure hooks that I just mentioned earlier, where it's like, hey, use this map for the dungeon crawling, which, okay, fine, but and there's some interesting options here. There's like, here's like a manor that's a dungeon crawl, here's a ship, here's a cave, here's a multi-tiered mine, and all these different ideas, which is fun, and I appreciate there's all here. But again, I expect more. I expect more from official, like, sample maps, which could in a way be like, here's like sample layers for your dungeon mastering needs, for example. I wish those two things, the adventures and the maps, had been more combined, and then just give me like 3 that are like, here's an amazing full color map, and then here's a beginning, middle, and end for this adventure with some neat socials. I don't expect you to insert like Lost Mine of Fendelver in the Dungeon Master Guide, for example. That's not the kind of scope I'm looking for, but maybe something that's closer to a one of those anthology missions that came in, like Keys to the Golden Vault or Candlekeep Mysteries or something. Like a smaller version of those, I think, could have been inserted here. I would have really appreciated that. And I think the maps, again, just don't really impress me too much, especially now with the big focus on VTTs, even more so now than it was 10 fucking years ago. Like, why not give us those really good, map arts and things? So that's a con for me. All right, final pro, if you've stuck around this long, is the one new thing that you've probably been looking to get some information on, and is the one, like, it's like the weapon mastery version of the player's handbook. It's like a completely new feature, and that is Bastions. Do I have a tab open for Bastions? Why do I not have a tab open for Bastions? Ugh, my goodness. All right, let's open a tab. Bartender, I would like to open a tab about Bastions. Actually, I do. It's open on special facilities. So Bastions are a new thing. It's going to take me a hot second to explain how this works. But they are player bases. And initially I was thinking, okay, this is like the party having its own headquarters, but that's actually not necessarily the case. In fact, the Bastion, as described, allows each individual player character to have their own Bastion, and only if the players want to, they can combine their Bastions into a single building or area, which I think is very interesting, because that allows players to be more distinct, especially if they've got completely different, backgrounds and, I don't know, cultures and ways of, if you got somebody who's a necromancer and somebody who's a bard, chances are they might not want to live together. Or actually, it would be probably a fabulous sitcom. I would watch the shit out of that. But anyway, the Bastion allows players to have their own home base, and it actually does have some pretty interesting and fun mechanics. You get it at level 5, so that's when you've reached, like, I don't know, a certain level of renown, basically. and you gain access to 2 special facilities. So you can always map it out with like, your kitchens or closets, your living space, whatever. But then you also get these special facilities, and all these special facilities, of which there are like, over 2 dozen of these, all actually give you mechanical benefits in the game. So as an example, you could have archives that give you advantage like skill checks through books. You could have gardens and greenhouses that you can grow herbs, which you can then transform into healing potions or potions of poison, or little, I don't know, food things that give you lesser restoration. There's various guilds with different abilities, like having a thieves guild that can actually steal shit and get you money, or an adventurers guild that can capture and hunt down local monsters. There's a lab you can concoct all your alchemical crap with. There's barracks for defending the Bastion, because yes, your Bastion could possibly be attacked. By the way, shout out to anybody who's played Frosthaven and getting like memories of the whole like city turn aspect of that. It does kind of remind me of that in ways. You have a forge for crafting weapons, a stable for housing your mounts, a teleportation circle, which is probably the single most useful thing. There are level limits on all these facilities, kind of like a Warlock Invocation or like spellcasting or something. So only you can pick, amongst the level 5 stuff when you first get your Bastion, but then as you level up, you gain 2 more at level 9, 1 more at 13, and 1 more at 17. There's a cool way of it, like reflecting the fact that you're getting more powerful and you're gaining access to these new features, almost like you're adding another, skill tree or progression tree onto your character, which I thought was actually a really cool idea and didn't necessarily drag the game down in the minutia of, fiddling around with all these different aspects. And you can either have them do all their various special abilities to concoct their things by taking Bastion turns, which is an awkward way of saying like, hey, let's let you, do your Bastion stuff. It's kind of up to the DM, but it's basically like, hey, while the players are traveling, or obviously when they stop home, or, might be a certain amount of time has surpassed that you want to trigger a Bastion turn. And if you don't have it, and the players decide not to do anything specifically with their stuff, then they do what's called a maintain order. So they do all these different orders they can actually give, like these are like the actions they have during a Bastion turn. And the maintain, it means that you actually roll on the Bastion event table, which I think might be in a different section. Where does it talk about? Yeah, Bastion events. So, and that is a random event table, and that's where you can have different attacks happening, or various people show up that either demand money or they're offering you money for different events. They're just kind of cool little events that the DM can kind of play with, that either act as a drain or a boon on your economy, or sometimes, maybe you could have one of your special facilities damaged and unable to use it if you don't have enough defenders. So there's a little bit of interesting, like, I don't know, macro level strategy there that you may not want to fuck with at all, and I totally get it. My problem coming with the Bastions, I actually really like this system, but looking back at all the campaigns I've run, my players have very, very rarely ever returned to the same place twice. Like, especially with the campaigns like, Tomb of Annihilation, and the current one that we're running right now, getting to the end of, which is Call from the Deep. Like, once they set off on this wide-reaching adventure, like, they are going off and covering a lot of distance and ground. And my Patreon game, Empire of the Ghouls, and never really returning home ever again until... So it's almost like, like a Lord of the Rings type thing, where it's like, you don't go back to the fucking Shire till like, the very, very end of the movie after 17 epilogues. Whereas here it kind of assumes the players are kind of have like a hub place. And that is kind of how the Greyhawk, Gazetteer is set up, and how the DMG is kind of like, hey, it's nice to have this place to hang up your boots and then go on these adventures and be more like serialized, which is interesting and actually does motivate me to maybe try running one of my campaigns that way, armed with this new Bastion gameplay element, and I think would make it a little more interesting to have that kind of hub place, and especially to allow the players to build up their own home, base, and have that happening while they're doing their traveling, and then always being able to return to that. So I do think the Bastion feature is very cool, but I also think it's not necessarily cool enough that it sells you this book, for example. Or if you're like me and you're like, well, we've never really futzed around with like home-based mechanics or anything. We've always been like murder hobos or just off for hire and going off on these exotic adventures. Totally fine. Like, I don't necessarily think it's amazing or anything, but it is, to me, just cool enough where I'm like, okay, I do kind of want to try this. It does, and some of my favorite like RPG video games have honestly done this in a really cool way. I love the Suikoden series, which is probably the best example of having a cool home base where all your different, allied people meet and you build it up over the course of the game. Neverwinter Nights 2, for a D&D example, had definitely a home base, same thing, where you had all your recruits and allies and things there. Like BioWare games obviously do this very well. Mass Effect, well, the ships, Inquisition, Dragon Age. Inquisition, I know at least did a home base thing. Pillars of Eternity did it, where you took over like a castle early on in the game, and that became your home base. So there's a lot of interesting precedent with that, and these new kind of rules are, I think they're just interesting enough to kind of explore that space. But before I stop this video, I also want to talk about something that I couldn't decide if it was a pro or a con. So I'm gonna just throw it out there, and we'll see what you think. But they changed the experience budget of the way the how am I gonna explain this? There's no more adventuring day at all, and the experience budget has been changed for per level. Gosh, did I have this open? Planning encounters there. Nope, this isn't it. Combat, running exploration. Venture examples. Where is it? Okay, yes, here it is. Thank you. All right. So XP budget was something DMs had to struggle with a lot, right? Which is like, how much should I be throwing at the party per day, going through the resources? How does this work? The 2014 version had an adventure daily budget, and then also had a per encounter budget for easy, medium, hard, and deadly. The new version has gotten rid of easy completely. There's no more easy, which is fair, like, because it's almost like, why are we having this fight? Instead, it just basically takes moderate, hard, and deadly and turns that into low difficulty, moderate difficulty, and high difficulty, okay, in the new version. The numbers are generally the same for levels 1 through 7. In fact, I think they're the exact same for XP budget, which means, you know, every creature has an XP amount listed, and you're supposed to deduct that much from this number, and then once you get to 0, without going over, that's the ranking of the difficulty and the level that they should be at. And you multiply this, by the way. This is only for one person. So if you have 4 people at level 5, then you multiply these numbers in row 5 by 4 each, and that determines what the difficulty would be for low, moderate, and high difficulty combat encounters. The numbers do change once you get to about level 8 or 9. I believe we get more XP budget for those levels going all the way to level 20. So compared to the 2014 version, that gives DMs a chance to use harder and more deadlier monsters, which I think is a good balance change, because I think we've all realized once party members make it to about tier 3, which is around 9 or 10 or 11 or something, their power level starts getting really astronomical, and it's very difficult to keep up with them for DMs. A lot of published adventures end at 12 for a freaking reason, and I suspect it's because the power level is just insane in 5th edition. So I think that's very interesting that they changed that. They also got rid of the how do I describe this? The scaling with multiple monsters. It used to be if you used more than one monster, you would have to do some kind of multiplication to its table to make it so those monsters were worth more of the XP budget than they would be individually, to where I guess it helped the party, because it was like, oh, well, these monsters are stronger when you have multiples of them, because of course they are, and therefore they should be worth more experience. Unless I'm misunderstanding, they got rid of that, which I think helps the DM and allows the DM to use more powerful monsters without having to worry about that multiplication system in general. So it seems like this is the first thing I've seen, because again, we've been looking all the player's handbook, and then we look at all the Dungeon Master's guide, and I haven't seen a whole lot of balance stuff in terms of the monsters versus players, and we just saw all the players got a big buff and a boost, right, from the player's handbook. This is the first thing I've seen where it's like, okay, they realize that the DMs need more shit too. Now, I'm looking at this without being able to compare it to the actual new monster manual, right? That's going to be the big key of everything, is like, how do those monsters keep up? But at least here, I'm seeing that, okay, it does seem like the DM is given more monsters to plug into any of these encounters. The fact that they got rid of the easy one and now treat moderate difficulty as low, the new low, basically, that they realize the fact that players are, you know, very ahead of the game and already have all the advantages. So I like all of, I think I like all of that, but they also got rid of the adventuring day, which was already a hotly contested thing. And instead of trying to fix that and say, oh, well, they should, so there's no benchmark for saying that the players should be able to handle, like, you know, 4 easy encounters and 5 moderate encounters and 1 deadly encounter per adventuring day. There's no benchmark for that anymore. They completely eliminated that, as far as I can tell. There's no more adventuring day context. So I couldn't decide if this was a pro or a con, or it's just kind of a balancing note. But I wanted to mention this because I think it was important to mention. But I don't know if it wasn't something I necessarily could decide on if it was like a like or dislike. So I'm annoyed that we lost the Adventuring Day concept because I think it was important for balancing purposes, at least, I thought. But it does feel like they're at least acknowledging the fact that, hey, DMs need more monsters or more challenges and stronger monsters to throw at these ridiculously powerful players. All right, I think that is going to do it for all my things that I like and things that I don't like from the Dungeon Master's Guide, which will effectively be my overall review of the book. I mean, I think it's a thumbs up, honestly, but I would not die on the hill of like, oh, this is a must-have. You absolutely have to have this book. I'm being honest. Like, if you've already got all the stuff released, you've got your Xanathars, you've got Tasha's, you've got all those source books and things that you care about for 5th edition, then yeah, you probably don't need the new 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide necessarily. But there are some really good elements in here, especially if you're into that Greyhawk source book aspect of it, or you don't, especially if you're missing some of those earlier books, then it could be very useful and handy to have this book as well. All right, thank you everyone for watching this video breakdown. You can look for more D&D 2024 content on the channel, though I think we're finally wrapping up our big class breakdown videos, as well as usual live streams and reviews. You can support my work always at patreon.com/Rogue Watson. Shout out to Platinum patrons Joe, Will, Thomas, Dan, Brennan, Zenicider, Eclectic, Roll, Pluto, Christopher, Corey, Big Nut, John F, John L, Nathan, Kirkus, Lake Counselor, Ender, The Reldrin, Stephanie, Jason, Amit, Lumpy, Spuds, Warden, Heldeman, LLC, Tom A, They're Eating the Dogs, Caleb, Marcus, Howard, and gold patrons, RPG Papercrafters, Pre-Boy, and Yuma, Diddled Lounge, Jerome, and the Passes, Like a Taurus, Scaff, Travis, Jerry, Glenn, and Mark. Thank you all very much for your support.